In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a scatter plot, and I'm going to discuss some of the elements of the scatter plot along the way. And so the example is the data relevant to education predicting earnings per day. And so I'm going to go into Graphs, Legacy Dialogues, and Scatter Dot, and Simple Scatter Define. I'm going to put the education variable in the x-axis and earnings per day in the y-axis, and click OK. And you can see that there are some elements to it that I got to clean up. So let me double click on the scatter plot, double click again, and get rid of the fill and get rid of the border, and click OK. I'm also going to change the scale a little bit and change that to 0 to let's say 350. And earnings per day, it literally puts the variable as it's written, so it's got the underscores in it, so I would want to put that like this. So I'm just going to clean it up so that you can see what I did in the textbook more clearly, in case you had to create one for your own report. Education, I'm going to change that. You just have to keep double clicking on the variables and you'll get options to change these things, and double click on that and change that to bold and 12. I could change the size a bit. I would actually, if I had to submit this for a manuscript, I would change the size. Certainly I like to make Scatterplot square. So let's double click chart size and let's make the height and the width the same. There we go. And I'll make these a little bit, just a tad bigger. There we go. All right, so it took a minute to clean that up, and we can see that this is the scatter plot depicting the association between education on the y-axis. I should change this to 0, I suppose, because you could have 0 levels of education. There's nobody in the data set with that. So this is where you have to make a bit of an executive decision. I think it actually looks better with the 5. All right, so we've got education going from 5 years of education all the way up to 25. Nobody has 25 years of education. A person with the most amount of education looks like about 22 or 21 years of education. And you can see that there's an upward trending line here, like the scatter plot pattern is upward, it's not downward. And that is a reflection of the positive correlation that was reported, something like 0.337. It's also consistent with the standardized beta weight of 0.337. And you could put a line of best fit, so you can double click on the scatter plot and you see this option here, add fit line at total. You can do that, click on that, and then a fit line is added, but then you probably want to deselect attach label to line, and that'll get rid of the equation. This is the regression equation, and it's really messy to include that in there, so get rid of that. And I also don't want the r² value, which is just the percentage of variance accounted for. So now I've got the scatter plot with the line of best fit, and obviously there's a fair amount of messiness in the scatter plot in the sense that there are observations that are fairly distant from the line of best fit, and that's a reflection of the fact that we're only accounting for about 11 or 12% of the variance in earnings per day by education. So although education is a positive predictor of earnings per day, it's not a perfect relationship by any means. And we can see that the person who earned the second most amount of money, this person here, looks like they had about 14 years of education, a little bit less than 15. And then the person who earned the most actually did have the most amount of education, but the second highest was actually a bit lower than 15. So that again is a reflection of the fact that the correlation is not a very large one. We're only accounting for about 11 or 12% of the variance. In fact, we can actually calculate it exactly 11.3569%. Again, to reiterate, the x-axis, I've got education going from 5 years to 25 years. And earnings per day, the y-axis, going from 0 all the way to $350 per day. And the intercept, if I actually fixed this and made it into 0, I could actually state something about the intercept as an estimate. And we can see that the line of best fit intersects with the y-axis at 0. I'd have to clean this up a little bit better actually and make no margin of space there. You'll see that that just moved the 0 close to the y-axis. And so now I've got, a ballpark estimate of something like 15 is what the scatter plot is estimating the intercept to be. But of course you would have to estimate it with the formula, not the scatter plot. It's just a representation. And this part of the scatter plot just doesn't have any observations at all. And so the estimate of the intercept ends up being really just that. It's an approximate estimate of what you would expect someone to earn if they had 0 years of education. Almost nobody has 0 years of education, at least in westernized cultured countries. So it's going to be really hard to estimate what that might be. So that is a scatter plot. That's how I cleaned it up. This is pretty close to publication quality. You'd have to decide whether you're going to have the 0 as the low point here or whether you're going to change it to 5. I'd probably make it a little bit smaller as well. So that is a scatter plot.